I find gold in very unique geology. The gold that I find is associated with heavy tin deposits, and that makes it very difficult to extract just the gold out of the black sands. It might be hard to see, but there is a lot of very fine flakes in amongst the black sand because the black sands are non-magnetic and extremely dense. So today, I'm going to run you through one of the processes I use to clean up my gold concentrates. And after this makes you need to go to the toilet, you'll be better equipped to clean up your own gold at home.
Pockets of gold.
Reedy Creek is famous for two things: gold and its tin. It was mined for both extensively through the 19th century. You may be able to see a little bit of the tin that's in these concentrates, and because it is tin, it's non-magnetic, meaning it's super difficult to separate the gold from that tin. Today's mission is to use my cleanup system, which is a Goldrat cleanup sluice box, DreamMat microcell mat, a speed controller from Washington Beach Mining, and an 18 amp hour marine battery, all connected to an 1100 gallon an hour pump, combined with some serious classification so that we may turn this dirt into golds. Okay, so what the hell did all of that actually mean? Well, the sluice box is designed to clean up concentrates, not to collect them. And that's thanks to the vortex matting system called DreamMat. But the DreamMat only works if you have water flowing over it. That's why I have a pump that puts out 1100 gallons an hour, attached to a speed controller so I can moderate the flow according to my concentrates. And it all runs off a waterproof battery. First thing I'm going to do is run all our concentrates through this mesh screen. Every one of those holes is about 1/20th of an inch. The reason I do this is so that the tiny gold doesn't have to fight against really big black sand. Everything's of a uniform size. 99% of the gold at Reedy Creek is under 1/20th of an inch. That means if I make that tiny gold fight against big chunky coarse black sand, it's going to lose. And by lose, I mean float out the end of my sluice box, because the black sand will have taken its place in the mat. In other words, we've got to get rid of all the chunks first. This is our plus. There shouldn't be very much gold in this at all, so I'm just going to hand pan this later. This is our minus 30 mesh. This beautiful stuff gets to go through the sluice box. Swells. Before you run your concentrates, you've got to make sure the dirt is wet, because dry dirt is hydrophobic, meaning it repels water and it tends to float. You might be surprised to know the gold will also float in this situation. Before you start running dirt, you've got to remove the bubbles from the mat. The bubbles are little pockets of surface tension, and if you don't pop them, they'll actively repel soil away from the cells. This is just a whole bunch of real repetitive scooping. I said repetitive, I really mean rewarding. These specialized vortex mats are designed to shed off as many heavy materials as possible while retaining a high percentage of gold. The DreamMat Micro boasts over a 98% recovery rate if set up correctly. And the setup is slightly dependent on your concentrates. In this case, I'm running the pump at about 600 gallons a minute, and I have the sluice box on about a 7-degree angle, but your settings may be different depending on your gold. To figure out your settings, I suggest running a loss test. Run some concentrates with a known amount of gold, hand pan the tailings, and see how much you lost. Then adjust accordingly. Haven't done too many spoonfuls so far, and we're starting to see some nice flakes come out. Due to the nature of the gold and the black sand, we will have loss. See, we've got gold reasonably far down the mat, so we know we're going to have some in tailings. That's why we rerun this later. I save all my tailings like this so that I can put them through different processes in the future. The loss rate I get from this system and these concentrates is because Reedy Creek gold is extremely flat and tin creates a lot of friction. The flat gold is actually unable to penetrate through the black sand a lot of the time. That's why we classify so everything is of a similar size, and we make sure we have the correct water flow so that the cells remain agitated. This agitation creates space and allows the gold to sink in. That is looking like a pretty good cleanup in my eyes. I reckon maybe half a gram or more. We'll find out when it hits the scales.
Pockets of gold.
Because we dump the gold up on this skid plate, you get a little bit of a collection of it in that ripple. You kind of got to flick it up onto your mat, because otherwise when you undo the bolts, it all goes through the bottom of the sluice. Now that you've taken an entire pan of concentrates down to just what's in the sluice mat, it's time to reduce it even further. There are a few machines that can do this, such as Miller tables, but in this case I'm going to show you a hand panning method, simply because almost every gold prospector has a gold pan. We took that entire pan of concentrates to down to maybe a handful. That is much easier to deal with. But before we do the minus 20 mesh, let's do the over. bigger the black sand and the bigger the gold, the easier it is to separate. That's why we can hand pan this as opposed to having to run it through a sluice box. What past Chris was meant to say is that the gold in the plus 20 mesh is big and dense, so it doesn't like to move, making it much easier to pan the black sand away. And obviously this would be a whole lot easier if I could just use a magnet. Clean water. And now to find out how many golds we may have got. We obviously got a fair amount of lead. Look at the amount of shotgun pellets in there. Bullets are made of lead. Lead's heavy and it collects with the gold. Golds. Oh, hey, we actually got a nice big flake. It's very flat, but that's nice. And we got a couple of other little bits to join it. I can see one over here. Yeah, for Reedy Creek, they're not bad, those bits. We got 4 nice flakes in the oversize. Those are pretty big bits for Reedy Creek. I'm real happy with those. That's not a lot of concentrates. So utilizing something like a small pan like this to clean it up can be a really enjoyable way to spend the afternoon. The trick to hand panning is to do a little bit at a time. I suggest using a teaspoon and doing 1 teaspoon at once. But I've been doing this for literally thousands of hours and I can do about this much in one go. I'm just going to remove any of those blonde sands that are left first. When I say blonde sands, I mean the light coloured sands left in the concentrates. These are still heavy because they've collected with the black sands, but not as heavy as the black sand. And by continuously reshaking the pan side to side, you'll bring those blonde sands to the surface. And this is due to a principle called stratification, where the heaviest things sink to the very bottom and the lightest things come to the top. Then we add a couple of drops of surfactant to break the surface tension of the water. That stops any of the gold floating. And lastly, I'm just going to pan this off over the smooth edge of the pan. It takes time and practice to get used to using the smooth edge of the pan, but it's the only way to efficiently shed the black sands whilst retaining the gold. Finally, we use the tilt method. This means putting about an inch of water on the bottom of the pan, holding the pan on a 45-degree angle and tilting the pan back and forth to return to that 45-degree angle so that the black sands slowly come down to the bottom of the pan and the gold remains at the top. I have a full video of this on my channel and linked in the description below. At the end of all of that, you have clean gold. That's not a bad little take. That's how I clean up gold out of black sands. It's a pretty simple process. It just takes a little bit of time and commitment and sometimes some swearing.